the defense of, well, I try, Kayode Raphael, something like this, who's going to give you all a talk about a very interesting subject, that is the possibility of smallholders to participate in global gap standards and in this way to qualify for exports. So I think this will be interesting for everyone. We have half an hour for your presentation. Then there is a maximum of a quarter of an hour for questions from you. And then we'll have something between half an hour and an hour of scientific discussion of the professors together with you. Okay, then the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Mola. My supervisors and co-supervisors, distinguished personalities present. In about 25 to 30 minutes, I shall be taking you through the results of my research over the last 1 year. And the topic again is Global Gap Standard in Kenya, understanding approaches to smallholder participation in fresh fruit and vegetable supply chain. The outline, a brief introduction, the Global Gap Standard in Kenya, the objective of the research, the method of the research, the result, and the discussion. In starting out, I'd like you to focus on this. This is more like what I would call the cross of the whole research. Regulation leading to certification, causing some form of exclusion, and there was some form of intervention. In terms of regulation, for those of us who have been following up on food safety related issues, particularly in this part of the world, over the last 10, 20 years, we discovered that in the 90s, there were some food crisis issues. A simple example was the M.Sc, the bovine spongiform encephalopathy, which is commonly called the mad cow disease. All around Europe and all around the world, there were concerns about food safety. And in the UK particularly, by the Act of Parliament in 1990, there was the Food Safety Act which was enacted. And also, generally in the EU, there was the EU traceability requirement. In other words, producers have to ensure that the produce they are supplying to retailers can be traced back and forth the supply chain. And in response, there were several private voluntary standards. And today I shall be talking about Global Gap, which is one of the very prominent private standards. This is a simple supply chain which shows how the Global Gap standard was passed down from retailers to producers. And I would particularly like you to focus on this. This will be very important. This will be very important, and the interaction with retailers and what exporters are doing to link smallholders to the supply chain. Exclusion. Certification became a tool to access supply chain. And in Kenya particularly, some smallholders could not meet the demand of certification. Well, the point about tight coordination of supply chain is the fact that since there were now rules, there were now laws which retailers could be liable to, they needed to tighten their supply chain. And certification became a tool to govern the whole supply chain. And also as a way of communicating quality assurance to retailers. Again, smallholders could not meet the certification criteria, which I'm going to explain more later in the course of this presentation. And there were reports that 60% of them that were initially linked to high-value supply chain were excluded. Now, in terms of intervention, a lot of stakeholders came on board, and several projects were formulated. I have some listed here. One of such is the African Observer Project, which was a project to get feedback from smallholders into the standard formulation mechanism. There was also the option 2, the group certification possibility of Global Gap. What option 2 basically means is that producers can come together and their production operation can be certified instead of individual certification for each producer. There was also what is called the smallholder interpretation guideline. which was a manual developed to make the standard easy to understand. And lastly, there was the benchmark scheme. Global Gap, in the case of Kenya, was benchmarked to Kenya Gap. I shall be talking more about this in the course of this presentation. And generally, we can talk more about what I call the donor-led interventions and the exporter-led interventions. In other words, donors intervene and exporters intervene in trying to link smallholders to high-value opportunity supply chains. A quick one about the Global Gap organization. It was established in 1997 by retailers in this part of the world. Don't forget I told you about private standards coming up and different retailers coming up with different private standards to govern their supply chain. And it was formerly called EuropeGAP, European Retail Working Producers Group, which means retailers in Europe came together to agree to a standard, a common standard, for which producers must be certified before they can supply them. And like I said, it's a private voluntary standard. And today, the Global Gap organization prides itself as a reference GAP standard around the world. And it also says it translates consumers' requirements into good agricultural practices. Well, the overall issue about Global Gap is to promote food safety, environmental management, workers' health, and animal welfare. This is a slide showing some information on the Global Gap standard. It's a pre-farm gate standard. What that means is that it's a process standard. Everything that goes on the farm can be certified with the Global Gap standard, but outside of the farm, it's outside of the jurisdiction of what the Global Gap standard certifies. It's a business-to-business label. What that means is that it's a label that is not visible to you and I as consumers, unlike fair trade, which we can relate with, which is a business-to-consumer label. The Global Gap standard is administered by what we call certification bodies. These are independent organizations that signs licensing agreements with the Global Gap organization to carry out certifications, third-party certification on behalf of the Global Gap organization. Producers around the world, all around the world, can become certified. And there is a tool of inspection, which is usually annual, or sometimes which can be unannounced, through which compliance to the standards are monitored. Well, in general, the Global Gap has what is called normative documents. There are 3 of them. What is called the Global Gap General Regulation, the Global Gap Critical Points and Compliance Criteria, and the last one, the Global Gap Checklist. The diagram to the right is just a picture showing certification possibilities or certification dimension of the Global Gap standard. For example, under the crop base, a producer can be certified for flower and ornamental, or for tea, or in this case, for fruits and vegetables. Or talking about livestock, you can be certified for your pig operation, or aquaculture, you can certify your pangasius. Now, in general, there are, like I mentioned earlier, what is called control points. Control points are, they follow the principle of HACCP. For those of us in the food safety world, we would understand what that means. And you have to ensure as a producer that there are systems in place for traceability. Like I said earlier, your operations, should there be a problem with a particular product, it can be traced back to where it was produced. And you have to keep record. You have to ensure that risk assessed. The history of your production site has to be recorded, and a whole lot of other procedures have to be put in place. There are certification options, 4 of them actually. As a big producer, you can be certified under option 1. But as individual producers, small scale in this case, and when I talk about small scale, in the case of Kenya, I'm talking about producers who have less than 2 acres of farm plots. So a number of them can come together and their operations can be certified. And option 3 is for benchmark scheme, and option 4 is for benchmark scheme as well. Today, all around the world, there are about over 94,000 certified producers, composed of both large-scale producers